Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we are going to be doing an overclocking guide for the AMD RX 480 using the Wattman tool within the AMD Crimson driver software. If you missed it the other day, I did a review and comparison between the RX 480 and the GTX 970, so if you missed the full review of that with the benchmarks and everything, I will link to that down in the description below, as well as the full written article that has all of my benchmarks listed in there, as well as the overclocked versus non-overclocked benchmark. So that link is going to be down in the description below. So to get started with our overclocking, once you are in the Wattman tool, which is in the AMD driver software, we have a couple of things that are in here. Up here at the top, we can see some lines going across. This is representing things like our activity, the GPU, core clock usage, memory, temperatures, and fans, and you can adjust all of these and check on which ones you want off. You have all of this control right here, which is really nice to have this right in the driver level, and you could also set it whether you want to see it at the peak or the average, and you can zoom in and out as well with this. So this is a nice way to kind of keep track of your clock speeds to see if maybe you're seeing something like thermal throttling during a long stretch of like an endurance test, like I did in my review where I tested Gears of War for over an hour to see if my overclock would waver because of temperatures. Thankfully, it didn't, using the custom fan curve that I set in here, and I'm going to show you all of that overclocking that I used. So right now you can see that the card is running at 1288 megahertz, which is my card's standard boost clock because I have the XFX Black Edition, which boosts up to 1288, which is a little bit higher than the standard 1266 on the reference RX 480s. Also within here for the GPU core clock, you can see we have all of these different steps or the states in here, and this controls the steps for which your overclock or the clock of the card is going to go based on its usage. So right now it's sitting up at the top, which would be 1288, but it also goes down in steps right here. Now you have two ways that you could overclock this. The first one is by frequency, which is set to by default at 0%, and then you could move this slider across and you could see it would go up based on percentage. Now for my particular card, I was only able to increase this by about 5% if I use this particular tool, but personally I like using the dynamic option because you can set all of these individual options in here yourself. So my max overclock I was able to get was 1350 megahertz, which you can see right here that I'm setting right now manually right before your eyes. And the way that I did that is just by this right here, just like you were seeing on your screen. You could leave these other ones at the lower ones if you want, but personally I wanted to make sure that my clock speeds were staying relatively high. Even if there were slight variations in the boost, I wanted it to stay, you know, above the 1266 megahertz for the most part, as long as it was able to within the temperature limitations that I did set on the graphics card. So I'm going to finish setting these right here the way that I had them set in my review that I did the other day, just the very same way. So that's 1200, and then I set this to 1100. And then this one I set to 900, and I'm going to go over exactly why I set that one to 900 in just a moment. For the voltage control, I did decide to leave those all at automatic, and I didn't have any issues with that right there. On the memory side of things, the overclocking is a little bit simpler. I just chose to go ahead and move this over, and the highest I was able to get this without any crashing or artifacting for me was 2200 megahertz. Now, obviously for you, that's going to vary based on the stability that you can get with your card, and I will touch on just in a moment how I actually test for stability with my overclock. So don't worry, I'm going to show you how I do all of that as well, but it's really simple. For the fan, by default, this will be set to automatic, but I do highly advise that you go ahead and adjust this yourself, because you can see by default right here, it's only running at around 1000 RPMs idle at the desktop, and I'm hitting 83 degrees Celsius. Now, it should be noted that I'm currently recording via OBS in 4K, and I have a front intake for my radiator, so it's blowing hot air right across the card right now as my CPU is sitting at like 70% load, so that is why you're seeing the GPU spiking so high. But in general, you'd probably want to go ahead and set this yourself if you want to have your card running cool, especially in gaming. So I had this set to manual, and for my target, I set this to 3100. So that is the highest that the fan will actually ramp up in terms of RPM. But you could set that higher than 3100. You can go up to 4000 if you want. But I found that over 3100, you start to get into the real like leaf blower area of fan noise. It gets really loud and extremely fast. And for the minimum, I chose to set this at 1500. Now, right below here, we have an option called the minimum acoustic limit based on megahertz. Now, this might not be clear to you exactly what this is, but essentially what this means is that your card's fans will actually stay off. So if the card is below whatever you set this value to. So right now it's set to 910. Now, if you remember, I set this to 900 up here, and the reason is so that if I'm idle at the desktop, the fans don't actually kick on until I go over 910 megahertz, which would ideally be when you go into a game. But if you wanted to set this lower or higher, then you can adjust this value right here, and that will control when your fans actually kick on based on the core clock of the graphics card. And I think this is an insanely good feature to have at the driver level to be able to set this yourself. Also in here we have our temperature controls, which we're going to set in here as well. For the temperature, I leave the maximum at 90, which is the max safe you should be able to get on this card before you start to see thermal throttling or get any warnings from Windows about the temperature. For the target, by default, it's set at 80, but I chose to bring this down to 70, and the reason for that is that the card will actually try to maintain that 70 degrees, so your fans will come on a little bit sooner if you set this target number lower than what the maximum temperature actually is. The last option in here is the power limit, and this is something that I found absolutely essential in order to be able to get stable clock speeds. Even on the normal boost clock when I was in games, I found that I had to set this up to 50% in order to keep that boost clock of 1288 megahertz while I was gaming. So that's why I have it set to 50%, and yeah. So once all of our settings are done in here, you can just go ahead and hit apply at the top, and it will apply all of your overclock settings. Now, I wouldn't recommend any of you to go out and just copy exactly what I did, without bringing it along incrementally. The way that I like to do it is by launching something like Unigine Heaven or Valley, and then running that in a windowed mode and kind of increasing my clock speeds slowly while that is running so that I could see if it's going to make it crash or I get any artifacts as I'm actually doing the overclocks right in real time. But once I've successfully been able to run through something like Heaven or Valley, the last thing I usually do is fire up something with a benchmark that I can kind of run on a loop. You could do it with Heaven or Valley if you want, but I'd like to see something with a little bit more video memory. Heaven and Valley are good because they're free, but they really don't tax the video memory that much. So I've been using Gears of War because they have a benchmark on there that just completely runs on a loop, and it uses over 4 gigabytes of video memory, taxes the graphics card extremely well, so that's why I like using that for a long-term endurance test to kind of see if our clock speeds waver at all over the long term and actually testing the card. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. I hope you enjoyed this overclocking guide for the Wattman software using the AMD RX 480. Initially, I found this software to be a little bit overwhelming and sort of non-intuitive, but once I figured out what everything did and how it all worked in terms of the target, temperature, and all that, it was really, really nice to use, and I would love to see something like this from NVIDIA at the driver level, which gave us a little bit more control over our boost clock. So really well done, AMD, on the Wattman software. Maybe not the naming, but everything else internally, very, very good. Wattman. And also just a quick update on the Crossfire video before I do get out of here. I wanted to let you guys know that currently I'm experiencing some issues trying to use Crossfire in my system. When I put in the two RX 480s, they scale very well in terms of actual game performance, but trying to play those games is a completely different story because I'm experiencing a lot of input lag and latency with my mouse and keyboard to the point where it makes it extremely unplayable for me personally. I'm very hypersensitive to this stuff, but I think it goes even beyond just being sensitive to it. This was really bad, like especially in Overwatch. I found it to be completely unplayable because of input lag, so I'm hoping to get a driver update or word from AMD on that soon. I know we're supposed to be getting a driver update in a few days maybe in regards to the power draw issue that had come up. I know Adored TV and Science Studio, they both did really good videos on the power draw issue as well as PC Perspective. So I'll link to those down below if you guys want to check those out on the PC power draw issue. I'm not going to be doing my own video on it because I feel those three channels have already covered it quite extensively, and I don't really think that there's need for another video on the topic. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, guys. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Ciao.